So we're in the fourth chapter now of Shekalim. We've collected the half shekels. We've put them in the storehouse. We've allocated them out 3 times a year at the time of the 3 foot festivals to buy offerings. And we talked in a little bit of detail about what actually we're going to spend the money on. And we found that they cover not just offerings, but all kinds of public works that are required for the city of Jerusalem. But then we have to ask and answer the questions, what are we going to do if there's any money left over? What are we going to do with surplus funds? And of course, this is a question which every treasurer of a public institution, even today, needs to figure out. So as we come into this question, where we come uncannily close to questions which disturb us today. So picking up then at the third Mishnah, the fourth chapter, the Mishnah asks, Motar sharei halishka mehayu osin bahen. What do they do with the surplus of the remainder in the chamber? And we're talking about now with the remainder of the cash in the chamber. So we've got to the 1st of Nisan. We've got to the end of the calendar year of the sanctuary. We're collecting new funds for the next new year. If there are funds left over from the old year, well, what can we do? And the Mishnah answers, or the first opinion in the Mishnah answers. We'll see in a minute, this is not the halacha. But the first opinion in the Mishnah is Lochen bahen yenot shmanim uslatot vehasachar lahekdesh divrei Rabbi Yishmael. According to Rabbi Yishmael, we're going to buy wines and oils and fine flowers, and the profit is going to belong to the temple. What does Rabbi Yishmael mean? He means that we're going to buy these commodities at market prices. But when pilgrims come along to bring offerings, and maybe they haven't brought their own offering, maybe they've just brought money and they need to convert that money into wines and oils and fine flowers, maybe at that point we'll sell them some of our stock and we'll sell them at a profit. And that way we can finance the activities of the Beit Mikdash. And Rabbi Akiva is going to disagree. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ein mistakrin mishel hekdesh. You can't trade with temple property. And then he goes on, velo mishel aniyim, and neither can you trade with property of the poor. In other words, property set aside for debt relief for the poor, for charity. And I can't help observing, as we look at this Mishnah, that Rabbi Yishmael is speaking in the time of the Mishnah. In the time of the temple. Rabbi Yishmael remembers the temple. And of course, Rabbi Akiva is born after the temple's been destroyed. And so maybe that's why they have radically different views on what is permitted. And the Rambam comments here, Kol masha mishtaker b'hen. That is to say, and he's trying to explain what Rabbi Yishmael is doing, but he's spelling it out. Kol hamistaker b'hen bein mikhan lemachran leotan shemakrivin hakorbanot mishar ha'am. That is, all the profits from buying and selling to those that bring sacrifices from the rest of the people. That's what we're talking about. These are the leftovers. And then he goes on to say, and Rabbi Akiva says, one is not prepared to make profits with holy items, nor with money that belongs to the poor. And then the Rambam concludes, 1,000 years later, halacha, Rabbi Akiva. The halacha is according to Rabbi Akiva. We don't trade with temple property. So let's then go on now. What was done with the surplus of the withdrawal? Remember, we withdraw from the storehouse 3 times a year, once for each of the 3 foot festivals. So if we withdraw, and then when the time comes for the next foot festival, we've got a surplus. Well, what do we do with that? Motar truma ma hayu osin ba. What was done with the surplus of the withdrawal? And the Stam Mishnah answers, the ordinary Mishnah answers, Rikiye Zahav Tzipui Levet Kodshe HaKodashim. We'd buy plates of gold for covering the interior of the Holy of Holies. It's a lovely idea, really. We carry on decorating the temple. Rabbi Ishmael says, he's, of course, following his derech, as we've learned in the previous Mishnah. Rabbi Ishmael Omer Motar HaPeirot Lekayetz HaMizbach. Rabbi Ishmael says the surplus of the produce, and he's talking about the trading surplus now, for the altar's dessert. That means extra sacrifices that they used to bring when the altar was empty. Umotar hatruma lichlei asheret, and the surplus and the rest of the surplus for the ministering vessels. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva Omer, motar hatruma lekayetz hamizbeach, the surplus of the withdrawal was used for the altar's dessert, because we don't trade. Umotar nechasim lichlei sharet, and the surplus of the libations used for the ministering vessels. And now, what's the surplus of the libations? Well, in this case, we do make some trading profits. So we have some suppliers who are contracted to provide, for example, flour. At the example given by the commentators is 3 sayers of flour for a seller. If the market price has dropped, then they're obliged to bring 4 sayers for a seller. But the temple is budgeted for the 3. So there's going to be a surplus somewhere, and that will be sold back to pilgrims at some point. And Rabbi Hananiah, Skana Kohanim, Rabbi Hananiah, the chief of the priests, sort of concludes, this surplus from essentially price advantages in buying offerings, that's the dessert of the altar, and the surplus from the withdrawal for the temple vessels, and neither of them allowed the surplus of the produce, i.e. neither of them allowed trading with temple property. Now, what about the surplus of the incense? How do we get surplus incense? Well, the temple used to manufacture incense on a 365-day per year basis. So they used to manufacture according to a solar year. But of course, we know that a Jewish year has got 10 or 11 days, 354 days. So it's got 11 days fewer than a solar year, except, of course, when it's a leap year and it has 22 days more. So we need some way of processing. That's every year. If we make incense for 365 days, we're going to be surplus 11 days worth of incense. And we need to process it in some way to carry it over, because next year or the year after might be a leap year and we might have 20 extra days. And of course, we can't, if it's been manufactured for 1 year, we can't apply it to the next year. So what would they do? They'd separate from it the wages of the craftsman, and they'd exchange it for the wages of the craftsman, and then they'd give it to the craftsman as their wages, and they'd buy it back again out of a new appropriation. So they would do some kind of complex sale and buyback with this surplus incense. And then the Mishnah concludes, Im chadash bizmano lokchen ota mitrumat chadasha. If the new month had arrived in time, they'd buy it back from the new month, otherwise from the old one. And what is going on here? Let's just have a look at these flows, because it's not obvious from the Mishnah what is going on. Look, here's the incense from year 1 on the left-hand side. And the treasurer would, obviously he needs to pay the workmen who made the incense, and he's going to take their wages in incense, or in some quantity of incense that is equal in value to their wages. And then from the cash room, he's going to take their wages in cash, and he's going to exchange the incense for the cash. So the cash becomes holy and the incense becomes unconsecrated. And he can then pay the workmen in incense rather than paying them in cash. Well, that works so far as getting the unconsecrated incense effectively off balance sheet. But of course, the workmen might not be very happy because they can't eat the incense. They can't survive on incense. So what are we going to do? Well, let's take the money now from year 2 or from the next month. The treasurer takes the workman's wages in cash. This is from the next year's subscription. Pays the wages in cash to the workmen, and they will pay back the incense. So we've now bought back our incense, but we bought it back out of the second year's cash. And that means we can then return it to, if you like, year 2 stock of incense if it's required in year 2. So we carry out a financial transaction which would not look out of place in any modern financial institution that was moving its assets on and off balance sheet. That's really what's described in this 5th Mishnah in chapter 4. And then as the Mishnah says, if the new month has come in, we can take from the new month, otherwise from the old one.